The morning mist hung low over the palace gardens as Princess Eugenie walked alone among the carefully arranged flower tributes. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the handwritten notes from strangers who had traveled hundreds of miles just to leave a single rose. The weight of public grief pressed down on her shoulders, and for the first time since the announcement, she felt truly overwhelmed. Behind her, footsteps crunched softly on the gravel path. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Prince Andrew had always had this way of appearing exactly when she needed him most, even during the darkest chapters of their family story. As her father's warm hand gently touched her shoulder, Eugenie felt the tears she had been holding back for days finally begin to fall. What happened next would be captured by photographers and shared around the world, but the real story, the one of a father's unwavering love for his daughter and a family's quiet strength in the face of unimaginable loss, would remain hidden from public view. Until now, this is that story. Princess Eugenie had woken before dawn that Tuesday morning. Her sleep broken by dreams she couldn't quite remember, but that left her heart racing. The palace felt different somehow, quieter than usual, as if even the ancient walls were holding their breath. She had dressed carefully in the navy blue coat her grandmother had once complimented, choosing her clothing like armor for the day ahead. The decision to visit the flower tributes alone had been impulsive. Her security detail had advised against it, suggesting she wait for the official family walkabout scheduled for later that week. But Eugenie had insisted. She needed to see for herself what the people were saying, needed to understand how the nation was processing the loss that had shaken the very foundations of everything she had known since childhood. As she stepped through the palace gates into the crisp morning air, Eugenie was struck by the sheer volume of flowers that had accumulated overnight. What had begun as a modest collection of bouquets the day before had transformed into a sea of color that stretched along the entire length of the palace railings. Roses, lilies, carnations, and simple wildflowers picked from country gardens created a tapestry of love and loss that took her breath away. She moved slowly among the tributes, her trained eye taking in details that the cameras couldn't capture. A small teddy bear sat propped against a bunch of daffodils, its fur worn smooth by a child's loving touch. Beside it, a photograph in a simple wooden frame showed a family of 5 standing in front of Buckingham Palace, their faces bright with excitement for what had clearly been the trip of a lifetime. The handwritten note tucked beneath it simply read, "Thank you for the memories. We will never forget." Each step brought new discoveries. A letter written in careful schoolchild handwriting, decorated with crayon drawings of crowns and horses. A bouquet of herbs from someone's kitchen garden, their earthy scent mixing with the sweet fragrance of roses. A small Union Jack flag that had clearly been waved at countless public events, its edges frayed but its colors still bright. The messages touched her most deeply. Unlike the formal condolences that filled the palace's official correspondence, these notes spoke from the heart with an honesty that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. "You taught us what it means to serve," read one card attached to a simple bunch of supermarket flowers. "Thank you for showing us how to be strong," said another, its paper spotted with what might have been teardrops. Eugenie paused at a particularly elaborate arrangement, a careful composition of white roses and baby's breath that must have cost someone a week's wages. The accompanying note was written on expensive paper in an elderly person's shaking hand. "Your Majesty, you were the grandmother I never had. Thank you for loving us all." The signature was simply Margaret, aged 89, Blackpool. The emotional weight of Margaret's words hit Eugenie like a physical blow. She had known intellectually that her grandmother's passing would affect millions of people, but seeing the evidence of that grief laid out in flowers and tears made it suddenly, devastatingly real. These weren't just subjects mourning their queen. These were people who had felt genuinely loved by someone they had never met, but who had been a constant presence in their lives for over 70 years. A group of elderly women approached the barriers while Eugenie was reading, their arms full of flowers for what appeared to be their own gardens. She watched them carefully arrange their tribute, adjusting each stem until it sat just right. They spoke in hushed tones, sharing memories of Coronation Day, royal weddings, and jubilee celebrations that had marked the milestones of their own lives. "She was always there, wasn't she?" one of them said, her voice thick with emotion. Through everything, the good times and the bad times, like a rock we could all lean on. My mother met her once, another added, touching a white rose gently. During the war, when she was still Princess Elizabeth. Mom always said she had the kindest eyes she'd ever seen. Said you could tell she really cared about people, not just the job. Eugenie felt tears prick her eyes as she listened. These women had lived their entire adult lives with her grandmother as their queen. She had been the constant in a world of constant change, the familiar face on their coins and stamps, the steady presence in their living rooms each Christmas morning. Now that presence was gone, and they were struggling to imagine a world without it. Moving further along the barriers, Eugenie discovered tributes that spoke to different aspects of her grandmother's life and reign. There were flowers from military veterans, their attached notes speaking of a monarch who had truly understood the sacrifice of service. Racing enthusiasts had left arrangements decorated with small toy horses, remembering a queen who had shared their passion and had never lost her infectious enthusiasm for the sport of kings. A collection of children's drawings caught her attention, each one carefully laminated to protect it from the morning dew. The artistic skills varied wildly, but the love evident in every crayon stroke was unmistakable. One showed the queen surrounded by corgis, all of them smiling cartoon smiles. Another depicted her in her coronation robes, the crown rendered in brilliant yellow that seemed to glow against the simple white paper. But it was the simplest drawing that affected Eugenie most deeply. A small girl had drawn two stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, with me and the Queen in heaven written carefully underneath in purple crayon. The innocence and faith in that simple image spoke to something profound about the relationship between the monarchy and its people, a bond that transcended politics and protocol to touch something fundamentally human. As the morning progressed and more people began to arrive, Eugenie found herself studying not just the tributes, but the faces of those who brought them. She saw grief, certainly, but also something else. There was pride in their faces, a quiet satisfaction in being able to contribute something to this spontaneous memorial. Bringing flowers, writing notes, simply being present seemed to give people a way to process their emotions and feel connected to something larger than themselves. A young mother arrived with two small children, each carrying a single flower. The woman helped her children find just the right spot for their contribution, explaining in gentle tones why they were there and what the queen had meant to their family. The children, too young to fully understand death, approached the task with a serious concentration they might bring to any important grown-up activity. "Will she like our flowers, Mummy?" the smaller child asked, carefully placing a slightly wilted daisy among the more elaborate arrangements. "I think she would love them, sweetheart," the mother replied, her voice catching slightly. "She would love them because you chose them with love in your heart." The simplicity and truth of that exchange stayed with Eugenie as she continued her walk. This wasn't about perfect flowers or expensive arrangements. It was about love, pure and simple. Love for a woman who had dedicated her entire life to serving others, love for the institution she represented, and love for the idea of continuity and stability in an uncertain world. The sun climbed higher as the morning wore on, and Eugenie realized she had been walking among the tributes for over an hour. The initial trickle of visitors had become a steady stream, and she knew that soon the area would be busy enough that her presence would draw unwanted attention. But she wasn't ready to leave yet. There was something healing about being here, something that connected her to the broader human experience of loss and love that her sheltered royal existence didn't usually allow. She paused at a tribute that particularly caught her eye, a carefully arranged collection of flowers that formed the shape of a crown. The person who had created it had used different colored roses to form the jewels, and the effect was both beautiful and moving. The attached card read simply, "For a queen who wore her crown with grace and carried our hearts with dignity." As she read those words, Eugenie felt the full weight of her grandmother's legacy settling on her shoulders. The woman they were all mourning hadn't just been the queen. She had been the keeper of a nation's dreams, the guardian of its history, and the bridge between its past and its future. Now that bridge was gone, and everyone was struggling to figure out how to move forward without it. The realization that she was now part of that continuum, that she and her family would be expected to carry on that legacy, felt both daunting and deeply meaningful. Standing among the flowers and tears of a grieving nation, surrounded by evidence of the profound love and respect her grandmother had earned through decades of faithful service, Eugenie understood for the first time what it really meant to be royal. It wasn't about privilege or protocol or living in palaces. It was about earning the right to hold a place in people's hearts through authentic service and genuine care. It was about being worthy of the love that was so evident in every flower, every note, every tear shed by strangers who had never met the woman they mourned, but who felt her loss as keenly as they might mourn their own grandmother. As she prepared to continue her walk, Eugenie noticed a small commotion near the palace gates. A group of photographers had arrived and were setting up their equipment, clearly hoping to capture images of the growing memorial. She realized her window for private reflection was closing, but she wasn't ready to leave the profound peace she had found among the tributes. That was when she heard the familiar footsteps on the gravel behind her, and turned to see her father approaching with the careful, measured pace she remembered from her childhood. Prince Andrew's face showed the strain of the past few days, but his eyes held the same warmth and understanding they always had when one of his daughters needed him. Without saying a word, he came to stand beside her among the flowers, his presence offering the kind of silent support that only a parent can provide. Together, they stood in the garden of memories that had grown overnight at the palace gates, two people bound by blood and loss, finding strength in their shared grief and in the overwhelming evidence of a nation's love. Prince Andrew had been watching his daughter from the palace windows for nearly 20 minutes before deciding to join her. He had seen her leave the building alone in the early morning light, watched her security team trail discreetly behind as she made her way to the growing memorial outside the gates. What had started as paternal concern had evolved into something deeper as he observed Eugenie moving slowly among the flowers, her shoulders growing heavier with each tribute she read. He knew that look. It was the same expression she had worn as a child when she first began to understand that her life would never be entirely her own, that being born royal meant carrying the hopes and expectations of strangers alongside her own dreams. He had seen it again during his own difficult periods, when the weight of public scrutiny had threatened to crush their family spirit. Now, watching her process the magnitude of public grief for her beloved grandmother, he recognized the moment when a young royal truly comprehends what they have inherited. Andrew had dressed quickly and purposefully, choosing the casual clothes he wore for private family moments rather than any formal attire that might signal an official appearance. This wasn't about duty or protocol. This was about a father responding to his daughter's need, regardless of cameras or public expectations. He had quietly informed his protection team that he would be joining Princess Eugenie, but had insisted on minimal security presence to preserve the intimacy of the moment. As he approached the memorial site, Andrew was struck by the same overwhelming display that had clearly affected Eugenie so deeply. The sheer volume of tributes was staggering, but it was the personal nature of each contribution that truly moved him. This wasn't the formal pomp of state ceremony. This was raw, authentic human emotion expressed through the simple act of bringing flowers to honor someone who had touched their lives. He could see his daughter ahead of him, stopped before a particularly touching arrangement. Her posture told him everything he needed to know. The slight tremor in her shoulders, the way she held her head as if it had become too heavy, the careful way she moved as though she might shatter if she wasn't careful. These were signs he had learned to read during her childhood, signals that his little girl needed her father. The decision to approach quietly, without fanfare or announcement, was deliberate. Andrew understood that what Eugenie needed wasn't royal protocol or formal comfort, but the simple presence of someone who loved her unconditionally. He had learned through his own trials that sometimes the most powerful support comes not through words, but through simply showing up, standing beside someone in their moment of need. When he finally reached her side, Andrew could see the tears she had been holding back beginning to form in her eyes. The note she was reading appeared to be from a family who had lost their own matriarch recently, drawing parallels between their private grief and the nation's public mourning. The raw honesty of their words had clearly penetrated the emotional barriers Eugenie had erected to protect herself from the overwhelming tide of public sorrow. Without speaking, Andrew gently placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder, the same gesture of comfort he had used throughout her life. It was a touch that said everything words couldn't, that she wasn't alone in this moment, that her grief was shared and understood, and that her father would stand beside her no matter what challenges they faced as a family. The physical connection seemed to release something in Eugenie that she had been holding tightly controlled. The tears that had been threatening finally began to fall, not the dramatic sobs that media might expect from a royal in mourning, but the quiet, steady tears of someone processing genuine loss. Andrew squeezed her shoulder gently, offering silent permission to feel everything she needed to feel without judgment or expectation. Together, they stood among the flowers as the morning light grew stronger around them. The memorial had taken on an almost sacred quality, transformed from a simple collection of tributes into something that felt like a cathedral built from love and remembrance. The silence between father and daughter was comfortable and healing, filled with shared understanding of what they had lost and what they still had in each other. As they moved slowly through the displays, Andrew began to see the tributes through Eugenie's eyes. Each flower arrangement told a story. Each note revealed a personal connection to the woman they were mourning. He watched his daughter read messages from children who had never known a world without Queen Elizabeth, from elderly people who remembered her coronation as young adults, from families who had followed every royal milestone as markers of their own lives' passages. The diversity of the tributes reflected the remarkable reach of his mother's influence. There were flowers from diplomatic missions representing countries across the Commonwealth, their formal arrangements standing alongside humble bunches picked from suburban gardens. Military wreaths honored her role as commander-in-chief, while racing silks attached to flower arrangements remembered her passion for horses and the sport that had brought her such joy throughout her life. Andrew found himself particularly moved by the messages from other parents. Many spoke of how Queen Elizabeth's visible love for her own family had provided a model for their own relationships with their children. Others thanked her for representing stability during times of personal crisis, for being a constant presence they could rely on when their own worlds felt uncertain. One note, written in careful handwriting on school paper, caught his attention. "Your Majesty, thank you for teaching my mom how to be strong. She always said you showed her that being a mother and having a job were both important. Love from Sophie, age 9. The innocence and insight of that message struck Andrew deeply, reminding him that his mother's legacy extended far beyond constitutional duties to touch the most fundamental aspects of human experience. Eugenie had stopped reading and was simply standing among the flowers, her tears flowing freely now. Andrew moved closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders in the protective gesture that had comforted both his daughters since they were small. He could feel her tension beginning to ease as she leaned into his embrace, allowing herself to be supported in this moment of vulnerability. She would be amazed by this, Andrew said softly, his first words since joining her. Not by the respect or the formal tributes, but by how personal it all is. Look at how they're writing to her like she was part of their families. Eugenie nodded, unable to speak, but clearly finding comfort in her father's gentle observation. Andrew continued, his voice carefully modulated to provide the steady calm she needed. She always said the most rewarding part of being queen was the letters from ordinary people, the ones who told her about their grandchildren or asked for advice about their problems. She kept some of them in her private study, the ones that made her laugh or reminded her why the job mattered. The image of their grandmother reading personal letters in her private moments, taking time to connect with individual stories despite her overwhelming official duties, brought fresh tears to Eugenie's eyes. But these felt different somehow, less overwhelming and more healing. Andrew's quiet reminiscences were helping her process the magnitude of what they were witnessing, transforming her grief from something that threatened to drown her into something she could carry forward. "I keep thinking about all the people who are hurting today," Eugenie finally managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. People who felt like they knew her personally, who were grieving as if they've lost their own grandmother. How do we honor that? How do we live up to the love she earned? Andrew considered his daughter's question carefully, understanding that she wasn't asking for platitudes, but for genuine guidance about how to carry the weight of royal responsibility. We start by remembering that it was never about being perfect, he said. Your grandmother made mistakes, faced criticism, had moments of doubt, just like anyone else. What made her special was that she never stopped trying to serve something bigger than herself. They continued walking slowly through the memorial, taking time to read messages and examine the more elaborate tributes. Andrew pointed out details he thought might escape Eugenie's notice. Flowers chosen specifically because they had been featured in royal wedding bouquets, arrangements that replicated gardens from royal residences, children's drawings that captured moments from televised appearances with remarkable accuracy. The attention to detail in so many of the tributes revealed the depth of connection people had felt with Queen Elizabeth. These weren't casual observers paying perfunctory respects. These were individuals who had paid attention to details of royal life because they genuinely cared about the person behind the crown. Their grief was authentic because their affection had been real. As the mourning progressed, more visitors began arriving at the memorial site. Andrew and Eugenie found themselves naturally shifting into a more public mode, aware that their presence would soon be noticed and that their private moment of reflection was drawing to a close. But the time they had shared among the flowers had served its purpose, providing both the space for genuine grief and the foundation for moving forward together. A small group of photographers had indeed appeared, maintaining a respectful distance, but clearly hoping to capture images of the royal family's response to the public outpouring. Andrew was experienced enough to know that their presence would soon attract larger crowds, and that the peaceful intimacy of the morning would give way to the more formal expectations of public mourning. "Are you ready for what comes next?" he asked Eugenie gently, indicating the growing media presence and the increasing number of visitors approaching the memorial site. Eugenie looked around at the extraordinary display of love and remembrance that surrounded them, then back at her father's steady, reassuring presence. "I think so," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. "I think I understand better now what we're trying to preserve. It's not just about tradition or ceremony. It's about this." She gestured toward the flowers and messages. "It's about being worthy of this kind of love." Andrew smiled at his daughter's words, recognizing in them the wisdom and maturity that would serve her well in the years ahead. The girl who had started the morning overwhelmed by the magnitude of public grief had found her footing among the tributes, discovering not just the weight of royal responsibility, but also its profound meaning. As they prepared to return to the palace, both understood that their relationship had deepened through this shared experience. The comfort Andrew had provided wasn't just that of a father to his daughter, but of one royal family member helping another navigate the unique challenges of their inherited position. In supporting Eugenie through her moment of vulnerability, he had also reminded himself of the enduring importance of the institution they served. The last tribute they examined together was perhaps the most moving of all. A simple bunch of wildflowers tied with a child's hair ribbon, accompanied by a note written in crayon. "Dear Queen Elizabeth, thank you for taking care of everyone. Now the angels get to take care of you." The innocence and faith expressed in those words seemed to capture something essential about the relationship between the monarchy and the people it served. Standing together in the garden of memories that had grown overnight at the palace gates, father and daughter found strength not just in their shared grief, but in their shared commitment to honoring the legacy that had been entrusted to them. The overwhelming evidence of public love surrounding them served as both a comfort in their loss and a reminder of the profound responsibility they carried forward. The palace corridors felt different when Prince Andrew and Princess Eugenie returned from their mourning among the flower tributes. The familiar halls that had echoed with decades of family life now seemed to carry the weight of history more heavily, as if the walls themselves were processing the magnitude of what had been lost. Andrew noticed how his daughter moved more slowly, her steps measured and thoughtful, as though she was seeing their ancestral home through new eyes. They made their way to the private family sitting room, a space that had always served as sanctuary from the formal demands of royal life. Here, surrounded by personal photographs and comfortable furniture chosen for comfort rather than ceremony, the royal family had always been able to simply be themselves. But even this intimate space felt changed, marked by the absence that would forever alter their family dynamic. Eugenie settled into her grandmother's favorite chair, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just days earlier, but now felt like a natural way to maintain connection with the woman they mourned. Andrew noticed the unconscious choice and said nothing, understanding that his daughter needed to find her own ways of processing grief and beginning to accept the responsibilities that had shifted to her generation. The morning's experience among the public tributes had clearly affected Eugenie profoundly. She sat quietly for several minutes, her gaze focused on a framed photograph of Queen Elizabeth at her coronation, young and radiant with the weight of destiny on her shoulders. The parallel between that moment and Eugenie's own dawning understanding of royal responsibility was not lost on either of them. "I never really understood before," Eugenie said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "I mean, I knew intellectually that she was important to people, that they respected her and the institution. But seeing all those personal messages, reading about how she affected individual lives, it's overwhelming." Andrew settled into his own chair, recognizing that his daughter needed to process the morning's revelations aloud. Throughout their family's various challenges, he had learned that sometimes the most valuable thing he could offer was simply to listen, to provide a safe space for honest reflection without judgment or immediate solutions. "The woman who wrote about teaching her children to serve others," Eugenie continued, "the veteran who said she gave him strength during his recovery, the grandmother who thanked her for being a constant presence through 70 years of changes. They weren't writing to the Queen as an institution. They were writing to someone they felt they knew personally." The insight revealed how deeply the morning's experience had affected Eugenie's understanding of what it meant to be royal. She was beginning to grasp that the relationship between the monarchy and the people it served was far more intimate and personal than she had previously realized. The crown wasn't just a symbol of authority. It was a focal point for millions of individual relationships built on trust, consistency, and genuine care. Andrew had wrestled with similar revelations during his own journey as a royal, particularly during the difficult periods when public scrutiny had challenged every aspect of his life and choices. He understood the weight of realizing that your personal life wasn't entirely personal, that your behavior and decisions affected not just your immediate family, but countless strangers who felt invested in your success and well-being. "Your grandmother understood something that took me years to learn," Andrew said carefully. "She knew that being royal wasn't about being elevated above other people, but about being connected to them in a way that requires constant awareness of that connection. Every choice, every public appearance, every gesture carried weight, because people were watching and hoping and sometimes needing to believe in something larger than their own daily struggles." Eugenie nodded, clearly working through the implications of that understanding. But how did she bear it? How did she carry the weight of all those expectations and relationships without being crushed by it? "I felt overwhelmed just reading a few dozen messages." She did this for 70 years. The question struck at the heart of what made Queen Elizabeth's reign so remarkable. Andrew had observed his mother throughout his life, seen her navigate triumph and scandal, personal joy and family crisis, always with the understanding that her private emotions were secondary to her public responsibilities. The strength and consistency she had maintained was perhaps her greatest achievement, though it had come at personal cost that the public rarely glimpsed. She had something that sustained her through everything, Andrew reflected. It wasn't duty in the cold sense that people sometimes imagine. It was love, genuine affection for the people she served, and absolute commitment to the idea that service was the highest calling possible. When you truly love something, protecting and nurturing it doesn't feel like burden. It feels like purpose. As they talked, both became aware that their conversation was being shaped by the profound changes happening around them. The palace was already adapting to new realities, staff members quietly adjusting protocols and procedures to reflect the altered hierarchy. Phone calls were being made, schedules rearranged, plans that had been theoretical for decades suddenly activated with the precision of a well-rehearsed symphony. Eugenie's phone buzzed with messages from her sister Beatrice, who had been meeting with palace officials about ceremonial arrangements. The practical demands of royal transition were beginning to assert themselves, pulling the family from private grief into the structured world of official mourning and constitutional process. But Andrew could see that his daughter was not yet ready for those demands. "Before we get swept up in everything that has to happen," Andrew said, "I want you to remember what you felt this morning among those flowers." The people who left those tributes weren't mourning a distant figurehead. They were saying goodbye to someone who had been part of their lives in a real and meaningful way. That's what we're working to preserve. The weight of preservation felt enormous to Eugenie. She was beginning to understand that her generation of royals would be responsible for maintaining traditions and relationships that stretch back centuries, while also adapting to a rapidly changing world that often questioned the relevance of monarchy. The balance between honoring the past and serving the future seemed almost impossibly delicate. Her grandmother had navigated that balance with remarkable skill, modernizing the monarchy gradually while never abandoning its essential character. Queen Elizabeth had embraced television coverage of her coronation when it was controversial, had allowed unprecedented access during family documentaries, had adapted to social media and digital communication while maintaining the dignity and mystery that made the royal family compelling to public imagination. "I keep thinking about the children's drawings," Eugenie said, "how they depicted her as someone approachable and kind, not distant or intimidating. How do we maintain that connection while also preserving the respect and dignity that makes the institution meaningful?" Andrew recognized the question as fundamental to successful modern monarchy. His mother had instinctively understood that accessibility and dignity weren't contradictory, but complementary, that showing genuine humanity actually enhanced rather than diminished royal authority. The challenge for Eugenie's generation would be maintaining that balance in an era of even greater media scrutiny and public skepticism about traditional institutions. "Your grandmother once told me that the secret was never forgetting that the job was about them, not about us," Andrew shared. "Every ceremony, every public appearance, every tradition we maintain is valuable only insofar as it serves the people we're meant to represent. The moment it becomes about our own importance or comfort, it loses its meaning." The afternoon light streaming through the sitting room windows was growing softer, and both father and daughter realized they had spent hours processing the morning's experience and its implications. The intimate conversation had served as a bridge between Eugenie's earlier understanding of royal life and the deeper comprehension she would need for the years ahead. A gentle knock at the door indicated that their private time was coming to an end. Palace staff needed to brief them on the arrangements for the coming days, family members required coordination for public appearances, and the machinery of constitutional monarchy needed their participation to function smoothly. But the foundation lay during their morning among the flowers, and their afternoon of reflection would sustain them through the challenges ahead. As they prepared to rejoin the formal world of royal duty, Andrew felt a deep pride in his daughter's growth and understanding. The young woman who had been overwhelmed by public grief that morning had begun the process of transforming that emotion into purposeful commitment. She was learning to carry the weight of royal responsibility not as a burden, but as a privilege earned through genuine service. "Are you ready?" Andrew asked, indicating the door where staff members waited discreetly for permission to enter. Eugenie took a final look around the room that had sheltered their family's most private moments, drawing strength from the familiar surroundings and the love that had sustained them through previous challenges. "I think I'm beginning to understand what ready means," she said. "It's not about feeling equal to the task. It's about being willing to grow into it with integrity and love." Her father's smile told her that she had grasped something essential about royal service. The woman who walked toward that door to meet her duties was different from the girl who had been overwhelmed by flowers and tears that morning. She carried with her now not just the weight of legacy, but also the understanding that that weight was shared with millions of others who believed in the institution's value and meaning. The real work of mourning and rebuilding was just beginning, but Eugenie faced it with new clarity about what she was fighting to preserve and why it mattered. The love evident in every flower, every note, every tear shed by strangers that morning had taught her that royal service at its best was simply love expressed through consistent, selfless action over time. As palace staff entered to begin the next phase of official proceedings, both Andrew and Eugenie carried with them the memory of their mourning among the tributes, the visible evidence of what could be achieved when service was authentic and love was genuine. That memory would sustain them through the ceremonies and challenges ahead, reminding them always of the human faces behind every protocol and the individual hearts that gave meaning to every tradition they worked to preserve. The late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the palace gardens as Princess Eugenie and Prince Andrew made their way to meet with senior palace officials. The formal meetings that awaited them would mark the beginning of their transition from private family members grieving a beloved grandmother to public representatives of an institution in profound change. The intimate mourning they had shared among the flower tributes felt like a lifetime ago, yet its lessons remained vivid and transformative. As they approached the staterooms where protocol officers and private secretaries waited, Eugenie found herself observing details of palace life she had previously taken for granted. The careful arrangement of portraits depicting centuries of royal history, the subtle but constant presence of security personnel, the way staff members moved with practiced efficiency born from decades of service. Everything around her spoke of tradition, continuity, and the weight of institutional memory. The principal private secretary, Sir Marcus Thornfield, had served the royal household for over 30 years, providing the kind of institutional knowledge that would prove invaluable during the transition period. His manner was both respectful and reassuring as he guided them through the immediate practical concerns that required attention. But Eugenie could see in his eyes the same grief she had witnessed among the flower tributes that morning, evidence that even the most professional relationships within the royal household had been touched by genuine affection for the woman they had lost. "Your Royal Highnesses," Sir Marcus began with a formal address that marked the shift from family conversation to official business. "We need to discuss your roles in the upcoming ceremonial proceedings. The public response has been extraordinary, and we want to ensure that family members are prepared for the level of attention and emotional intensity you may encounter." The practical concerns were complex and far-reaching. Security arrangements needed adjustment to accommodate unprecedented crowds expected at ceremonial events. Logistics officers were coordinating with local authorities in multiple cities to manage public viewing areas and flower tribute sites that had appeared spontaneously across the country. Communications teams were balancing the need to provide regular updates with respect for the family's private grief. But beneath the practical planning, Eugenie detected a deeper conversation about the very nature of modern monarchy. The overwhelming public response to Queen Elizabeth's passing had demonstrated the enduring emotional connection between the royal family and the British people, but it had also raised questions about how that connection should be maintained and nurtured for future generations. The spontaneous memorials have appeared in over 200 locations, reported the Deputy Communications Secretary, consulting her tablet for the latest updates. From major city centers to small village greens, local authorities are coordinating to ensure they're managed respectfully while allowing people to express their grief publicly. The scope of public response surprised even experienced royal staff members who had witnessed decades of public engagement with the monarchy. This wasn't just London or major cities. This was a truly national expression of loss that had emerged organically from communities across the entire country. The geographical spread and personal nature of the tributes suggested something deeper than formal respect for constitutional authority. Eugenie found herself thinking about the conversations she had overheard among the flower bearers that morning, ordinary people sharing personal memories and explaining to their children why this moment mattered to their family histories. The institutional planning being discussed in the stateroom felt removed from those human connections. Yet she was beginning to understand that both perspectives were necessary for successful modern monarchy. What were people saying in their messages? Eugenie asked, interrupting the flow of logistical discussion. Beyond the formal condolences. What themes are emerging from the personal tributes? The questions seemed to catch the staff members slightly off guard, as though they hadn't expected a family member to be interested in the content rather than just the management of public response. But Sir Marcus smiled approvingly, recognizing that Eugenie was asking about the substance that would ultimately matter more than the procedures. "The recurring themes are quite remarkable," replied the deputy private secretary, clearly pleased to discuss the human dimension of her work. Gratitude for consistency and stability, appreciation for visible family values, respect for service and duty demonstrated over decades. But also more personal elements, people crediting Her Majesty with teaching them about resilience during their own difficulties or expressing gratitude for representing their country with dignity on the world stage. Andrew watched his daughter process this information, seeing how she was beginning to connect the morning's emotional experience with the institutional framework being discussed. The bridge between personal grief and public service was becoming clearer to her, the understanding that royal duty at its best was simply human compassion expressed through consistent, principled action over time. The conversation turned to Eugenie's specific role in upcoming ceremonial events. As a senior member of the royal family who had maintained strong public approval and genuine warmth in her public appearances, she would be expected to participate in several key moments of national mourning and celebration of Queen Elizabeth's legacy. The expectations were significant, but the staff members were careful to emphasize that authenticity would be more valuable than perfection. "The public is looking for genuine emotion and connection," Sir Marcus explained. "They don't want to see royal family members as distant figures going through ceremonial motions. They want to see you processing the same grief they're feeling, honoring the same legacy they're celebrating. Your authentic response will help them process their own emotions." The insight revealed something important about the modern relationship between monarchy and democracy. Rather than expecting royals to be elevated above common human experience, the public seemed to want them to serve as focal points for shared experience, providing a framework for collective processing of loss, celebration, and transition. It was a delicate balance between accessibility and dignity, relatability, and respect. Eugenie asked about the international dimension of the response, curious about how Queen Elizabeth's death was being received beyond British shores. The reports painted a picture of global mourning that transcended political boundaries and cultural differences. Leaders from around the world were expressing personal as well as official condolences, and spontaneous tributes had appeared in major cities across multiple continents. "The Commonwealth response has been particularly moving," noted the international liaison officer. "Not just official statements from governments, but grassroots expressions of grief and gratitude from ordinary citizens who felt personal connections to Her Majesty despite never meeting her. The scope of impact is honestly unprecedented in our experience." The global dimension of public grief helped Eugenie understand the true scale of what her grandmother had achieved during her 70-year reign. This wasn't just British or Commonwealth mourning. This was recognition of someone who had transcended national boundaries to become a symbol of stability, service, and dignity that resonated with fundamental human values regardless of political systems or cultural contexts. As the meeting continued into early evening, Eugenie found herself thinking about the contrast between the formal discussion of ceremonial protocols and the intimate humanity she had witnessed among the flower tributes. Both were authentic expressions of the same underlying relationship between monarchy and people, but they served different functions in helping society process major transitions. The ceremonial aspects provided structure and shared meaning, allowing millions of people to participate simultaneously in honoring Queen Elizabeth's legacy and marking the transition to a new era. But the personal tributes revealed the emotional foundation that made those ceremonies meaningful, the individual relationships and connections that gave life to institutional traditions. "I want to make sure we don't lose sight of what I saw this morning," Eugenie said as the meeting began to wind down. The people leaving flowers and writing personal notes weren't just paying respects to an institution. They were saying goodbye to someone who had been part of their lives in a real way. That connection is what we need to preserve and honor. Her comments seemed to resonate with the staff members, many of whom had devoted their careers to serving an institution they believed made a positive difference in people's lives. Sir Marcus nodded approvingly, clearly pleased that Eugenie was focusing on the substance rather than just the procedures of royal service. That's precisely the challenge for the years ahead, he agreed. Maintaining those personal connections while adapting to changing social expectations and technological realities. Your grandmother succeeded because she never lost sight of the individual people behind every protocol and ceremony. As the formal meeting concluded and staff members began gathering their materials, Andrew felt a deep satisfaction in his daughter's growth and understanding. The young woman participating thoughtfully in this planning session was markedly different from the overwhelmed figure he had comforted among the flowers that morning. She had begun the crucial process of transforming personal grief into purposeful service. The transition from private family member to public representative wasn't complete, nor would it ever be fully finished. Royal service required constant navigation between personal authenticity and public expectations, individual desires, and institutional needs. But Eugenie had demonstrated that morning and afternoon that she possessed both the emotional depth and intellectual curiosity necessary for that ongoing balance. As they prepared to leave the state rooms and return to family quarters for a private dinner, both father and daughter carried with them a deeper understanding of the work ahead. The ceremonial proceedings would honor Queen Elizabeth's remarkable legacy, but the real measure of success would be whether they could maintain the human connections that had made that legacy meaningful to millions of individual lives. The bridge between worlds that Eugenie was learning to cross connected intimate human experience with institutional tradition, personal grief with public service, individual authenticity with collective meaning. Walking that bridge would require constant attention and careful balance, but the morning's evidence of genuine public love had shown her that the effort was worthwhile and necessary. The flowers and tears and personal messages she had witnessed represented more than mourning. They represented hope that the values and connections Queen Elizabeth had embodied could continue to flourish under new leadership. That hope was both a gift and a responsibility, a foundation to build upon, and a standard to maintain through whatever challenges lay ahead. The evening air carried a gentle coolness as Princess Eugenie and Prince Andrew walked together through the private palace gardens, their conversation from the afternoon's meetings still echoing in their minds. The formal day was drawing to a close, but both understood that their real education in royal service had only just begun. The manicured paths and ancient trees around them had witnessed generations of similar conversations, moments when younger royals wrestled with understanding their inherited responsibilities. Eugenie paused beside her grandmother's favorite rose garden, where Queen Elizabeth had often taken her morning coffee when staying at the palace. The roses were in full bloom, their fragrance heavy in the evening air, creating a living memorial that seemed more appropriate than any formal monument could be. Here, surrounded by beauty her grandmother had personally tended and enjoyed, Eugenie felt the presence of the woman they mourned as a comforting rather than overwhelming force. She would have loved seeing all those personal tributes today, Eugenie said softly, touching one of the rose blooms with gentle fingers. Not the formal arrangements or official wreaths, but the drawings from children, the letters from families, the flowers picked from people's own gardens. Those would have meant everything to her. Andrew nodded, remembering countless conversations with his mother about the aspects of royal life that brought her the greatest satisfaction. Queen Elizabeth had always been most animated when discussing letters from ordinary citizens, particularly those that shared personal stories or asked for guidance with everyday challenges. The formal ceremonies and state occasions had been important to her sense of duty, but the individual connections had fed her soul. The understanding that had emerged from their day together represented a fundamental shift in how Eugenie viewed her royal identity. No longer was it simply an accident of birth that carried certain privileges and restrictions. It had become a conscious choice to serve something larger than herself, to maintain connections that brought meaning to millions of lives she would never directly touch. As they continued their walk, both were aware that photographers and media crews continued to gather outside the palace gates, drawn by the ongoing story of royal transition and public grief. But within the private gardens, surrounded by the accumulated peace of centuries, they found a space to process their experiences without external pressure or expectation. I keep thinking about what comes after the ceremonies, Eugenie confided. After the formal mourning period ends and the public attention moves on to other stories. How do we maintain the connections we witness today? How do we prove worthy of the love people showed in those flower tributes? The question struck at the heart of successful, long-term royal service. The intense public focus during times of crisis or celebration was relatively easy to manage because clear expectations and established protocols guided behavior. But the real work of monarchy happened during the quiet years, through consistent service and gradual relationship building that created the foundation for public trust during crucial moments. Andrew had learned through his own experiences that royal service was fundamentally about showing up reliably over time, maintaining visibility and engagement even when media attention was elsewhere and public interest seemed minimal. His mother's remarkable achievement had been her consistency across 7 decades, never allowing personal preferences or temporary difficulties to interfere with her commitment to service. Your grandmother once told me that the job was like tending a garden, Andrew shared, gesturing toward the carefully maintained landscape around them. Most of the work happens when nobody is watching, during ordinary days when there's nothing dramatic or newsworthy happening. You plant seeds, water regularly, weed consistently, and trust that the beauty will emerge when it's needed most. The metaphor resonated deeply with Eugenie as she considered the evidence of patient cultivation she had witnessed that morning. The personal connections expressed in flower tributes hadn't emerged spontaneously with Queen Elizabeth's death. They had grown slowly over decades of reliable presence, authentic engagement, and consistent demonstration of the values people admired. They reached a secluded bench where Queen Elizabeth had often sat to read her daily correspondence, a simple wooden seat weathered by years of use but maintained with careful attention. Without discussion, both chose to sit for a few moments, drawing strength from the connection to family history while processing the weight of responsibility that was shifting to their generation. The palace around them was alive with activity as staff members worked through the night to coordinate the complex logistics of national mourning and constitutional transition. But in the garden's peaceful embrace, father and daughter found the calm necessary to envision a future that honored the past while meeting contemporary needs and expectations. I think I understand now why she never seemed overwhelmed by it all, Eugenie said, her voice carrying new confidence and clarity. She wasn't carrying the weight alone. Every person who left a flower today, everyone who wrote a personal note or shared a memory, they were all part of holding up the institution. It's not about one person being perfect. It's about millions of people choosing to believe in something together. The insight revealed the democratic foundation underlying modern monarchy, the understanding that royal authority ultimately depended on public consent freely given and regularly renewed through authentic engagement. Queen Elizabeth's remarkable 70-year reign had succeeded because she had earned rather than simply inherited the respect and affection evident in every tribute left that day. As evening deepened into night, both became aware that their contemplative time was drawing to a close. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of official ceremonial proceedings, media commitments, and public appearances that would test their understanding and resolve. But the foundation laid during their day of reflection and discovery would sustain them through whatever challenges emerged. Eugenie's phone buzzed with messages from her sister Beatrice, sharing updates about family coordination and logistical arrangements. The practical demands of royal transition were reasserting themselves, pulling them back toward the structured world of official duty. But both carried with them a transformed understanding of what that duty meant and why it mattered. "Are you ready for what starts tomorrow?" Andrew asked, using the same question that had marked transitions throughout their day together. Eugenie looked around the garden that had sheltered her grandmother's private moments, drawing strength from the continuity it represented while accepting the changes that loss inevitably brought. "I'm ready to try," she said. I'm ready to work toward becoming worthy of what we saw today. Not perfect, not immediately capable of everything required, but committed to growing into the role with integrity and love. Her father's smile reflected pride, not just in her words, but in the woman she was becoming through this trial by fire. The princess who had been overwhelmed by public grief that morning had transformed into someone capable of carrying forward a legacy built on service, consistency, and genuine care for others. As they walked back toward the palace, both understood that their relationship had deepened through shared experience of loss and discovery. Andrew's comfort and guidance had helped Eugenie navigate her most challenging day as a royal family member, but her growth and insight had also reminded him of the enduring value and meaning of their inherited responsibilities. The lights glowing in palace windows spoke of ongoing work, staff members, and family members preparing for the days ahead with the precision and dedication that had sustained the institution through previous transitions. But the real preparation had happened in gardens and among flower tributes, in quiet conversations and honest reflection, in the recognition that royal service at its best was simply love expressed through consistent action over time. The promise of tomorrow wasn't about returning to business as usual or maintaining traditions unchanged. It was about carrying forward the best of what had been inherited while adapting to serve contemporary needs and expectations. The evidence of public love surrounding them provided both comfort in their loss and confidence that the work was worthwhile. Standing together before the palace entrance, father and daughter shared a final moment of connection before returning to their separate roles in the complex machinery of royal transition. But the understanding they had developed together would influence every decision they made, every public appearance they undertook, every private moment of doubt they experienced in the years ahead. The flowers and tears and personal messages they had witnessed represented more than mourning. They represented possibility. The future of monarchy would be shaped not by protocol or tradition alone, but by the ability to maintain authentic human connections while serving institutional purposes. Eugenie had learned that day that the weight of royal responsibility could be carried successfully when it was shared with millions of people who chose to believe in something larger than themselves. The woman who walked through the palace doors that evening was different from the girl who had awakened before dawn to walk among flower tributes. She carried with her now not just the burden of inherited duty, but also the understanding that such duty, when performed with authentic love and consistent service, could create the kind of legacy that would comfort and inspire future generations facing their own challenges and transitions. The garden that had sheltered their conversation would continue to bloom through changing seasons, just as the institution they served would continue to evolve while maintaining its essential character. The promise of tomorrow lay not in avoiding change, but in embracing it with the same integrity and commitment that had sustained Queen Elizabeth through 70 years of remarkable service to something larger than any individual life or personal ambition.